Have you ever been offered company shares or stock options, but you're not entirely sure what to do with it? Or are you a startup looking to incentivize her team but without the resources to do so? Well, that's where employee stock option plans, aka ESOPs, come in. They are a very common way to incentivize your team, especially if they are high earners and you don't have the liquid resources to do so. Hey guys, I'm Noma Grace, a corporate and tech lawyer passionate about helping founders and startups just like yourself start, grow, and scale their businesses. And in today's conversation, we're going to be talking about ESOPs. I have noticed in my experience that most founders and employees either don't know what ESOPs are, don't know the appropriate way to implement them, what they're all about, and how they can benefit from them. But today, I'm going to break that all down. Let's dive right in, guys. What are employee stock options, aka ESOPs? Well, an ESOP is an initiative by a startup that grants its employees the right, not the obligation, the right to buy shares at a pre agreed price sometime in the future, usually after a vesting period or after certain conditions are met. When they exercise that option to own shares in the company, they could either buy the shares at a fair market value or at a discounted rate known as the strike price or the exercise price, depending on the nomenclature at work. ESOPs are very important to startups because when they are initially starting their business, they don't really have as much funds as they would like to pay their high earners or to pay the top staff in the company. And so, therefore, ESOPs are a brilliant way for them to incentivize their team without spending the cash that they would otherwise need for operations at that moment. Instead, the team can own shares in the company, own a stake in the company, and become even more invested in the growth of the company because they know that if the company grows and does really, really well in the market, then so will their shares in the company. ESOPs are generally offered to early hires. So those people that join the company when it's still at its very, very early stage before it has found its footing in the market. It is also granted to key hires such as maybe the CEO, a business lead, the CFO, or any other strategic thinker or strategic hire in the company. ESOPs are also granted to advisors or consultants that work with the company, offering their strategic insight and value. The size of the option pool is dependent on, again, the individual's role in the company and whatever he or she was able to negotiate with the founders or the leaders of that company. It's not set, it's usually not set in stone, but it ranges from anything from 10% to 30% of the company's total value. So, what is an ESOP flow? What are the stages that an employee stock option plan goes through from ideation till benefit or till money in your bank account as a shareholder in the company? Step one in this ESOP flow is the plan creation. As a founder, as a startup, you need to first decide on how much options or how much of your equity pool is going to be restricted or separated for key hires and employees in the company. As I mentioned earlier, typically that option pool is anything from 10% to 30%, but most companies stick with 25%. Now, once you have determined how much of an option or how much of a pool your employees are to be granted stock options from, it's time to draft your ESOP general policy. Now, this is the general policy that is going to be applicable across the company board for all ESOP beneficiaries. It doesn't matter the level or the stage or the negotiation. This general policy, as the name implies, it is the policy that is going to apply across board. For each individual party or for each individual beneficiary of the ESOP plan, he or she can be granted or can be a letter of grant can be written per individual. But that letter of grant will obviously always refer to the general ESOP policy. Now, it is in the plan creation that you decide on what the pool is, how much it is going to be in that pool, the general ESOP policy, and your individual letters of grant. Step two in this ESOP flow is the issuance of the letters of grant to the respective beneficiaries. Now that you have figured out what the option pool is, you have agreed amongst yourselves as a board of directors, you have created a general ESOP policy, and you have drafted a letter of grant, or at least a template format that you can use to customize per beneficiary. Now it's time to issue it out to the respective beneficiaries. In this letter of grant is where you state the exact specifics that relates to each party or to each person. Whatever it is that the parties or the employees negotiate is what will be included in the letters of grant. Now, again, letters of grant does not imply that the person is automatically a shareholder. No, it is merely issuing them the option to buy shares in that company. Step 3 in this ESOP flow is the vesting period. Typically a 1-year cliff with a 3 or 4-year vesting period. Now, what is vesting? It is a period of time that must pass before your shares can fully become yours. To explain the 1-year cliff and 3 or 4-year vesting period, the 1-year cliff is basically the time that you must work with the company before your entitlement to buy those shares kicks in. So I give you a letter of grant and I say 1-year cliff with 3-year vesting or 4-year vesting. Now you must work with me for 12 complete months first before you even have the right to buy or exercise your option to buy those shares in the company. Now, at the 12-month mark, there is usually a 25% of your shares vest at the 12-month mark, or depending on how the agreement between yourself as an employee and the company is structured. Now, after that 12-month period, which is the cliff, after it has passed, at the completion of it, 25% typically vests. Now, throughout the rest of the 3 years, remember it's a 1-year cliff and a 3 or 4-year vesting period. Now, after the end of that cliff, the 3 or 4-year vesting period is now the time when your shares will vest either monthly or quarterly, depending on your agreement or your engagement with the company. So it's going to vest in portions throughout that period of time. Now, before you even enter the cliff and vesting period, you and the company would have agreed on the time within which you must exercise those shares. The agreement typically states that you must exercise your shares within 6 months, 90 days, 12 months, depending again on the terms of engagement. Whatever the case is, you must actually pay the agreed upon price for those shares within that time. If you do not pay the agreed upon price, either the fair market value or the discounted rate, which is the exercise price, if you don't pay it within the agreed upon time, then you lose the right or the option to buy shares in that company unless the company grants you that option or right again via a letter of grant. Step 4, which I've already started to explain, is the exercise notice. Now, when the letters of grant has been issued and before you enter this cliff and vesting period, they would have told you, like I mentioned earlier, to exercise your shares within a specific time or within a set period of time. Now, to exercise those shares, you as the employee must issue to the company an exercise notice notifying them that you are ready to exercise or buy your shares at this time. Now, once the shares have been bought, your cliff begins to count and then your vesting begins to count. And at the end of your vesting period, all of the 100%, the totality of all the shares you have been offered in that company would have fully and completely vested, and you would officially be a shareholder in the company. Step 5, you are officially a shareholder in the company. Congratulations. Now, at this point, people start to wonder, well, okay, I've gone through this entire 4-year period. I've done all this and I've done all that. I've met all my performance milestones. How can I then get money for my shares? Well, at this point, you are a shareholder in the company. And so therefore, when the company makes money, when it makes revenue and it declares its dividend, you would receive a dividend based on your shares. Now, that's one way. Another way is if you decide to sell your shares. Typically, in an ESOP agreement or in an ESOP general policy, the company usually reserves a right of first refusal. That means you have to first offer those shares back to the company first before you can then offer them to a third party. The company has to have the right to refuse to purchase those shares from you before you can offer sale to a third party. Now, when you offer it to the company or when you offer it to a third party and they buy it off from you, they ought to buy it off at a higher price than what you bought it for. Now, when they buy it at a higher price, obviously the excess or the extra on it becomes your profit. And that's also one of the ways you can make money in an ESOP. Another way is if you are a shareholder in the company and the company decides to IPO, or it decides to otherwise restructure itself by either a merger, acquisition, or something else that injects funds into the company. As a shareholder in the company, when the company undergoes such a restructure, again, either it IPOs, starts to sell its shares to the general public through an initial public offer, which is IPOs, or it undergoes a merger with another company, it acquires another company, or is acquired by another company. When the money, the revenue is generated as a result of that restructuring, as it's being divided, as a shareholder in the company, you have rights to a certain percentage based on your shares in that company. So now you know the entire ESOP flow from ideation all the way down to money in your account. The flip side is also true that if the company does not make any revenue, or if it breaks down before the time, or if it closes up, your shares or the value of your shares will significantly reduce depending on the depth or the damage that was done by the company as a whole. So there are two sides of it. Now, what I just gave you is the most simplistic explanation of ESOPs and what they are. That you understand ESOPs at its most simplistic level, what are the documents that a company needs, or that you as an employee need to receive for your ESOP to be truly and fully implemented in the company? Well, the very first document is the general ESOP policy, which is basically the company-wide ESOP Bible, so to speak. This is the document that contains all of the terms and the conditions that regulate your stock option or your ownership of shares in that company. It's not the shareholders agreement, it's not the investors agreement, it's not your employee contract. There ought to be a general ESOP policy, a separate agreement that caters to the restricted option pool that the company has set aside for its key hires. It includes terms like the exercise price or the strike price, the purpose, the duration, the performance milestones, if any, taxation and compliance requirements, and all of those broader things that need to be specified. The second document you need to implement an ESOP policy is the letter of grant. This is where, as I mentioned earlier, the specific customized clauses or agreements reached between the company and that ESOP beneficiary is written down or penned down. So if employee A says or is being given 10% of the general option pool, then this next employee will be given maybe 2.5%. Obviously, they would not be given the exact same terms and conditions as in the letters of grant. So each person has to have his individual rights in his individual letter of grant. The third document is the exercise notice. The first two documents were provided by the company, but the exercise notice is to be provided by the employee, notifying the company of his or her intention to exercise that share option at that moment in time. You don't bring it before, you don't bring it after. The moment you are ready to exercise your shares, aka put money down to buy your shares, that is when you bring the exercise notice and give it to the company, and the company signs and you make the requisite payments, and you become officially a shareholder in the company. The next mandatory document that the company needs to provide is an option certificate. Now, this is a certificate. It's akin to a shareholder certificate or share certificate that is given to. The next crucial document that is to be provided by the company is an option certificate. An option certificate is akin to a share certificate. It's basically saying, out of this option pool, person XYZ has been granted dash however many percent, thereby becoming a shareholder in the company. Honestly, it's as simple as that. Other documents that are required in an ESOP, these four I've listed, both the general policy, the letter of grant, the exercise notice, and the option certificate. They are mandatory. However, there are other documents that are needed to complement these existing four. And they are, number one, the board resolution, which is basically an agreement by all members of the board of directors agreeing to, number one, have a restricted option pool for employees, and number two, setting aside the specific amount. How is the pool going to be? 30%, 25, 20, 10, 15, however many it is. the board resolution is supposed to state as much. There is then supposed to be an updated cap table. If, for instance, in the Nigerian context, you have a million share capital and that million naira share capital is not going to be enough to cover for your restricted shares, then you need to update your share capital with the Corporate Affairs Commission. And obviously, when you update your share capital, you need to then update your cap table. Even when you don't update your share capital at the CAC level, you still need to update your cap table because it is the itemization of ownership in the company. So you need to then state that person A as an employee has joined based on the stock option plan. You also need vesting or performance appraisal tracking sheets. Now, most ESOPs, especially the ones that I have worked with or worked on, are very performance based, right? So you cannot just have rights to the shares simply because you spent a certain amount of time in that company. No, that comes with certain KPI metrics that that employee must meet. And so to track that, you might need a performance appraisal or vesting tracking sheet. Again, totally optional for you. You also need a deed of accession. Now, a deed of accession is needed only if a shareholders agreement will be created or is created in the future. If a shareholders agreement is not created, then you don't really need a deed of accession, because a deed of accession accedes to something, saying that, hey, we had this agreement previously, but now you have this new structure, and so therefore the old agreement is acceding to the new one. So if you don't have any new future agreement that is going to take over the rights, responsibilities, and obligations contained in the general ESOP plan, then there's no need for a deed of accession. Again, these are simply optional documents that you can or cannot use if you desire. Now, how is an ESOP implemented in your company? How do you actually go about its implementation? Step one, you need to have a meeting with the board. The board needs to agree to even restrict a pool or an option pool out of its shares, and it needs to state how much of that pool is to be restricted for ESOPs. Step two, draft the necessary documents. Step three, design a vesting schedule that aligns with your goals as a business. Step four, track every single thing with the right tools and be transparent about it as well. Step five, plan for an exit event. Most companies that start or do or implement ESOPs don't really consider exit events. How will the employees exit the company should they wish? What happens where they are terminated, where their employment with the company is terminated? What happens if the company IPOs, or if it otherwise restructures, or if something else happens and the employee no longer owns those shares or will no longer own those shares? You need to plan for such exit or succession events. Now that you know or have a basic understanding of employee stock option plans, it's very important for you to know that their ESOPs are not merely about rewarding top talent. When done right, they can be a way to create a culture of ownership and accountability in the company. It's also a way to foster long-term engagement with a key stakeholder, which are your employees in the company, because now they obviously have to stay that length of time to enjoy the ESOP, unless they want to forfeit the ESOP. Okay, but obviously, to properly implement and enjoy the benefits of an employee stock option plan, it has to be structured right. It has to be done right from the very beginning. Otherwise, you're just going to be patching things and fixing things until eventually the whole thing collapses. And so, if you need help looking at your existing ESOP policy or even implementing a brand new one in your company, please do not hesitate to tell me as such in the comment section. I will be reading and responding to each and every comment that you write. And if you liked this video, please don't forget to hit the like button so that it can be shared to more amazing people such as yourself. Until next time, guys, bye.